thought, thinking, so then I guess I don't think anything happens to us after we die. Consciousness fades and stops like every other organ. So people just die. And I thought, wait a minute. So Hitler just died? Nobody sat him down and said, you screwed up, buddy, and now you're going to spend an eternity in a fiery hell. So Hitler just died. You better make sure that never happens again. And my brother Mike, this means that he just died. I always had this idea that Mike's death, while premature, was his divine destiny somehow, and that his spirit didn't really die, but it lived on. Not just in the memory of those that knew him, but in a real, tangible sense. And I realized that I now thought he died. He really died. And he was gone forever. And then I realized I had to go back and basically kill off everyone I ever met who died, who I guess I didn't think really died. And then I thought, oh, I get it. So, I'm gonna die. So I'm gonna die. And I sat down on a bench and I watched people bustling by and I thought, wow, life is so cheap and so precious. So I'm just another animal on Earth. Just a type of primate. The third chimpanzee, better at using tools and able to talk. And then I am going to die. And there will be eons of time when I will not exist. Just like the eons of time before I did. I'm in my 40s, about halfway through my life, I hope. At this moment, the sun and the earth and I are all middle-aged. Just an animal on a planet in a solar system. Nothing special. But then, I think about it this way. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and for the first billion years on Earth, there was no life at all, nothing. And for the next 3 billion years, there was just algae and archaeobacteria. Dull green and brown primordial slime for 3 billion years. And then just 500 million years ago or so, boom, complex life came on the scene. Plants and animals, including us who've been around for what? 100,000 years to 1,000,000 years or so, depending on what you consider to be human. I mean, if Genesis is a metaphor for creation, that metaphor is way off. God would not be creating man on the 6th day, but like the 6,000th day. And all of humanity would have been here for less than a minute. Actually, less than a second. Adam and Eve were just blinking their eyes, barely awake. So if you think about it, even if simple life exists readily all over the universe, it could be that any type of complex life is fairly rare. And then, when you think how, like, eyes have evolved over and over again, or how, like, flying has evolved over and over again, but a species with a brain like ours, able to use language and tools the way we do, well, that's happened only once in 4.5 billion years on Earth. I mean, it's not so improbable as to be impossible given all the time involved and all the different ways that species have come up with to try to adapt. But still, it's got to be pretty rare for animals like us to turn up. And in my DNA is a history of this life on Earth, not just back to the African Pliocene, but even farther back to when we crawled out of the pond, and then even farther back from that, when there were only single-celled organisms, all told in the cells of my own body. And to think that I get to live at a time when I can know and understand that, it makes me feel so lucky. Then I started thinking about all the little happenstances, all the random little moves which resulted in me being alive, me in particular at this very moment. Not just of my parents meeting, but even of the millions of sperm against the hundreds of possible eggs. I thought about this randomness multiplying. My parents, their parents, Tom meeting Marie in Yakima, or Henrietta meeting Will on that cruise to Cuba. And then their parents, and their parents, and their parents, and all the ways it could have gone one way, but it went the way it went. And all the possible people who could just as easily be here in my place. Richard Dawkins wrote, Certainly those unborn ghosts include poets greater than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. But in the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. I suddenly felt very deeply that I was alive with my own particular thoughts and my own particular story in this itty-bitty splash of time. And in that splash of time, I get to think about things and do stuff and love people and walk along Larchmont Boulevard with my coffee if I want to, and then that's it. I walked to my car and I had a ticket. My time had expired. And I got in the car and I turned on the radio and there was that old Peggy Lee song. It used to be my mom's favorite. And I suddenly had this memory of us in the kitchen and that song coming on the radio and my mother flipping hamburgers and dancing around the kitchen, taking care of all of her kids. So there is my friends, and let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball. If that's all there is. I went to Spokane to visit my parents. My dad walked to church every single morning to Lourdes Cathedral for their 6:30 a.m. Mass, and then he took the bus back home. On days that I was in town, I always went with him. My dad was really fun to walk to church with. He had this special way of walking downtown that took him past his favorite store windows, and he could see if they changed things. On the bus ride home, we would usually muse over the wording of certain prayers or recitations in the Mass. My dad loved it when the priest said, "Satan, who prowls through the world for the ruin of souls." We both agreed that it was that word prowls that made that phrase just perfect. Later that day, I told my parents that I'd stopped believing in God. They just looked at me blankly. Sometimes I feel so sorry for my parents to have me as a kid. Sometimes I feel so thankful that my parents had a lot of kids. My mother said, "This doesn't mean that you've stopped going to church now, does it?" I suddenly felt so guilty about this religion, my parents' religion, this religion that they had given us kids, which I was now basically handing back to them. I went to a conference in Washington, D.C. put on by the Center for Inquiry, this nonprofit group that promotes science and critical thinking. A lot of people spoke at the conference, and then I got to give a speech too, which included my views on God. And the Associated Press covered it. And the Wire story was picked up by my hometown paper, Spokane, where I'd recently hosted the Catholic Charities Luncheon, where I'd spoken repeatedly at my Catholic high school, and where my parents took such pride in their Catholicism and in their children, and who I believe now in retrospect felt that my Catholicism was what connected me to my hometown, to my social class, and to them, in spite of having moved so far away. So one day, weeks and weeks after this speech, and without me even knowing that this article even existed out there, my parents got up and went out to get their morning paper. And there I was in the back of the front section, a big picture of me in bold letters in huge type. It said, "Sweeney loses her religion." And the first two sentences of the article were, "Julia Sweeney has come out of the closet, period, as an atheist, period." It was the local angle, and they led with that. And then the article went on and talked about the conference in general and barely even mentioned me again. Well, the first call I got from my mother was really more of a scream. "Atheist! Atheist!" My father got on the phone and said, "You have betrayed your family, your school, and your city." It was like I'd sold secrets to the Russians or something. They both said that they were not going to speak to me